Since Doom mastered the template of the first-person shooter over 2 decades ago, we've been subjected to over 20 years of design iteration. That doesn't exactly leave much in the way of new ground for the genre to stomp on. So what do you do when you're asked to recreate the feel of a game that came out over 20 years ago, while you're expected to have it sell in an incredibly unforgiving first-person shooter marketplace?
The 3 pillars of Doom 2016's gameplay are monsters, guns, and level design, and today we're going to take the time to look at how each one was crafted. But there's another aspect of Doom that provides the fuel for your psychotic rampage: its extraordinary soundtrack by talented producer Mick Gordon. So we should probably have a quick chat with him too.
Today we get technical and dive into the design of Doom 2016, its combat chess, glory kills, curious level design, and furious soundtrack.
My name is Jerry Kean. I'm the lead level designer on the Doom project, a lead level designer here at id. I joined the team back in 2003 during the development of Doom 3. If you remember the Delta 3, the teleportation level?
Yes.
Yeah, that was one of mine. Some of the Alpha Labs levels, Delta Labs. The only ones I didn't really touch were the Hell maps. Right. That was another designer.
What was it like trying to reimagine a game like Doom again, right? Because like you'd worked on the old UAC, and there was a sort of a vision of what that thing was now. What was it like, 12 years later, almost like going back to like remodeling your old home or something?
I think that, I think about this, like, how did we get here? Like, the fondness of Doom 1, right? And the fans, we have a huge fan base. What does a Doom 1 game look like today? Some of the things about Doom 3 that, graphically fantastic. Doom 3 was just, accolades for how good it looked. There was controversy. I think there was even some division maybe with the fan base of like, horror versus fast-paced, and it's like, can you mash those two together? Like, can you do an awesome visual experience, but like bring back, what was Doom 1 to people? Well, it was fast, it was fun, it was fierce, it was crazy, it was, not like anything anyone else had played ever before, I don't think, Then what does that look like then? What game do we need to make? So that at its core drove us.
Jerry said the direction the team eventually went in didn't look anything like what we expect from most single-player campaigns. In fact, it found its roots in a multiplayer mode his team was originally testing before that part of the game was outsourced to Certain Affinity.
Ultimately, the layouts, the spaces, really is an evolution of that multiplayer idea, the dance, the move around the space. And so the balance was striking a believable place to a multiplayer layout. And so, this is like in Res Ops, for example, that was you get to the first imp, we call it the imp room. What it looked like originally was a box with some crates, And so, and then from there it goes to, we're going to start to do multi-tier because, we went forward in a lot of levels and we made progress in some of the Hell maps and places where there was a lot more verticality and over and under, and so then we revisit those boxes. We go, okay, so now how do we make this space just as fun? But you have to tailor it back because you only have imps, for example, or Hell soldiers or whatever, and so you have to go, okay, we have to, make the space fit the combat we're going for and the type of AI we have in there.
From talking to the team, there are a number of terms that they all seem to use. They talk about steering into ideas, going where the fun is. But the term I've heard more than anything else refers to the driving force behind Doom's gameplay, from its level design to the movement, to how you're rewarded with health and ammunition for using glory kills. 3 simple words: push forward combat.
You think about multiplayer, you're not backing up. Right, like you are going forward to the next location. You're going to I see the ledge, that looks like a place of advantage, I'm going to go there. So that was always in the mind of every designer, just about everyone. It's like, the push forward idea was, we don't want to be scared and backing into a corner. That's kind of the picture. Not necessarily that you would be, but stay away from that. So how do we make sure that, and like things like the glory kills, that played into it beautifully, getting loot or getting health and from the bodies, it's like, that means go that way and get that stuff. Because normally you end up with less health in an engagement. So it's like, just go forward and then do it again. We basically use that as like a move forward because you're going to do more damage moving forward than you will going back.
It was actually one of the things that when we first started showing the game at E3 or at QuakeCon or whatever, people would comment on the glory kills, and they're like, screw these glory kills, man. They're going to slow down the gameplay. And it's one of those things you can't say it. You can't say no. But people are so used to that kind of like the sync interactions in a lot of games. I think one of the best parts of the way that animatic played out and the way that they were implemented, like right from the get-go, was that you never felt like they were in the way. They happened quick, and so much of the animation takes place after the actual syncing, that you get the kind of beauty of the animation that you would normally have if it's all kind of like a QuickTime event or a totally synced event. But we take the player out of the sync so fast. You know, you can be turning and the guy's continuing his animation over here, so it never feels in your way.
The design of the levels really played into that a lot. One thing we wrestled with was, locking you into a room, making you do it, and we tried to make that as fun as we could.
Was there a time where that wasn't the case, where you could just like barrel through the levels?
There were a few places like that, and it does present problems, because like what happens when I drag all this AI into another room, and so what do we do with all that? And then you end up with you're backed in and you can't do anything. So there was a concerted effort to try to pace those things out properly, and we did have to, all right, lock the doors here and don't let you go until you deal with the situation. You can't have all the AI in the level chasing you through it, right? Because everything is costly. Every time you put an AI on the screen, it's costly. It costs something.
So the team steered into it, pushing forward at all limits, into danger, utilizing choke points and open areas. But the system was limited, as the demons were capable of traversing the environment with abilities far greater than most first-person characters. So they steered into that as well, and leveled the field by giving the player the ability to mantle.
The mantling came as a result of moving fast through the world. We wanted it to be fast, we wanted it to be, because that was a core element of Doom. You felt fast, whether you were or not, but you felt fast, and that was something that's like, okay, that's what people felt. That's what when you remember it, when you go back, you go, Doom 1, it was fast. Like that was, okay, well then that's got to be one of our top pillars. That's got to be one of our top core elements of the game. And so we wanted to try to kind of blow the lid off of level design in terms of, well, it's going to be this corridor shooter, it's going to be whatever, like pigeonhole it into something. We used it. We said, all right, now we have this awesome mantling ability. Let's just use it everywhere. Let's build levels and secrets, sure, yeah, I can mantle to get to the secret or whatever.
While much of the game's combat is centered around these closed-off areas, there are some interesting set pieces that break up the flow. The Argent Tower level with its long bridge was not only designed to teach the player how to double jump, but also to teach them where to mantle. There's an old trick frequently used in level design: light leads the way. If you're ever looking for the exit in an area of an FPS, it's usually telegraphed by some sort of eye-catching light source. Doom's mantling system used a similar trick by highlighting climbable surfaces with green LEDs. But sticking big green indicators all over the levels was a difficult challenge to overcome.
That was a tough thing for us because, again, we're very art heavy. We love the quality and look of things, and you could almost not put anything in the levels that didn't look gaudy, When you do that, you're like, well, how do we distinguish the ledge grabbable surfaces from the non-ledge grabbable surfaces? And green lights ultimately paid off, and it came through in a lot of the prototype maps because we just put just put a green light there, and it's like, well, why don't we just do that? And it works for the most part because green is good, green is go, right? So that's generally, it's like more of a psychological thing, and so we try to do it as naturally as possible so it wasn't too gaudy.
Many first-person shooters involve you taking on waves and waves of enemies. Think Call of Duty, Battlefield, or id's cancelled Doom 4.
You take on waves of similar-looking enemies utilizing cover and pushing forward once an area is clear. On the face of it, that sounds like most FPS games, right? But Doom works a bit different. Doom is a game where you enter areas only to be surrounded by enemies. At the start, that's just imps. Let's represent those as pawns. But as you make your way through the level, the game introduces new enemy types, which combine with the ones you've already mastered. The Summoner, who darts across the map in an instant. The Hell Knight, who jumps around in close quarters. The Pinky, who charges in straight lines. What this creates is a form of combat chess, where the player is in an enclosed combat arena with increasingly varied enemies to battle. The further you get, the more demons you're tasked at slaying. But against such increasingly challenging odds, how is the player expected to survive?
The player's massive loadout of guns, what's known as a hyperspace arsenal.
The weapons in Doom are rooted in the earlier games, but with the ability to modify them to create entirely new ways of firing. The team put months of work into creating a variety of modifications for each weapon. The standard rocket launcher, for instance, has mods that allowed for remote detonation, locking onto enemies, charging for more explosive rockets, and the ability to fire swarms. Not every modification made the cut, but the ones that did created a thrilling arsenal of weaponry that are as varied as the demons they were made to destroy.
The imp is just amazing. Like, he's the character that you could just keep fighting again and again. You get a room full of imps in our levels with the way these guys set this stuff up, and you're just going to get good results.
Well, they were the easiest, honestly. They were the hardest and the easiest because they are a staple. Consequently, they also had the most robust, the largest amount of animations went into them. So really, we could put them anywhere. So we weren't limited in the design of the levels with the imps. They could go anywhere, they could do anything.
Probably some of my favorites, probably the Pinky. I love that he's this freight train. There are many times when I'm in like the last level of the game or any level of the game, and you're doing the dance and you're feeling like a rock star and you're kicking major ass, and he just plows you from the side, just like, you're like, holy shit,
He has, again, limited animation set, but his role was he didn't have a ranged attack or anything like that. So he basically beelines it for you, and you step aside, shoot him in the back because he's got armor on the front now. And we thought it was a fun game mechanic to be like, oh, okay, well, if I figure out, I could waste a whole bunch of ammo and get him from the front, or I could, if I actually do my double jump, because we don't, you have the double jump by the time he's introduced, and you can double jump over him or to the side of him and get him when he comes by.
I love that about him. I think he perfectly complements the dance, and that's what it is. Like, as you play through the game, you're playing chess, the combat puzzle that you have to solve, and your tools and the amount of chess pieces on the board increase, and the size of the chessboard and the type of chessboard increases as you progress through the game.
Think about the Baron. He's the largest AI we have. So his leaps are naturally going to be larger. All his movement is much broader and bigger. So the space has to accommodate that.
The Revenant is probably my favorite because he's so straight metal. I mean, he belongs on the cover of an Iron Maiden album, and he looks, I like that he looks insane. Because it's everything, there's humor in everything. I mean, I have a hard, as you can tell, I try not to take things too seriously. And I like to focus on the emotional response that you'll get from the consumer. Like, when I show you something, I put a product in your hand, I put a new phone in your hand, we sit in a car, you watch a movie that we worked on, or play a game that we made. What are you doing? I want to see, are you going like this? Well, maybe we're making that type of game and I want you to be scared. Are you smiling the whole time? Because that's how you should be on Doom. Like, totally we wanted you to smile. We didn't want you to shriek or cover your eyes, smile. So when we showed it at QuakeCon and you see the Revenant, the Revenant just makes you smile because he looks ridiculous, He's like losing his mind. He's never not screaming, it's just hilarious. So, and he makes everybody smile, so and to be honest, it is why we get away with the level of violence that we do, because it's kind of all okay. It's all in good fun. I'm just gonna rip his arms off, like, this is fun. We're having fun, And because if it's just a little bit mean-spirited, I think it's a little bit, tonally it gets a little more harsh and we didn't mean-spirited, and we didn't want that, Popcorn horror. That's what we called it. Popcorn horror. Horror for the whole family.
While the music in many games complements and underscores the action, the music in Doom is really front and center, like a death metal orchestra playing to your every footstep.
As someone who loves music but has absolutely no idea how the creative process for writing music even begins, I was fascinated to have the opportunity to sit down and talk to the game's composer, Mick Gordon. He had just arrived back at his home in Melbourne, Australia, after appearing on stage at the Game Awards the previous week. The first question I had for him was, how do you even start to craft the soundtrack for a game that's still in development?
The start of each project, you spend this big time kind of coming up with some sort of joint creative language where you're both able to use similar words and you both understand the same meaning behind those words. If there's any ambiguity behind the conversation, 18 months later, when you've got no time left, you're going to run into all sorts of troubles. So it's important at the start of every project, we always try to spend that time discovering each other's kind of creative boundaries and what each person means. So when somebody says, hey, let's make it really heavy, what does that actually mean? Because heavy to them might mean something completely different to somebody else, for example. So I always try to, in every single project, is to have some in-studio time. When I visited the id Studios in Dallas, it was incredible. I mean, you've been there. The glass cabinet that greets you when you enter the office is amazing. It's full of those old, clay sculptures and things that they used 20 years ago to make the demons back then.
It must be quite intimidating to try and reimagine such an iconic soundtrack. What was your creative process sort of starting this whole venture?
Yeah, whenever you're working on a huge franchise like Doom, it's important to kind of put that legacy on a high pedestal. It really is. I'm a big believer in that. I'm not a big believer in like pushing everything aside from the past and then trying to create something new or recreate it. I think it's really important to pay really strong tribute to that legacy that has come before. That being said though, if you focus on that too much, you're going to get very laser focused and become intimidated and scared and lose your confidence with the work that you're doing. So one of the first things that we kind of did is actually just crossed out the word Doom. I just started ignoring that word and I said, well, what is this game all about? What's it actually about? It is very much a modern first-person shooter, don't get me wrong, but it's futuristic. It's a futuristic science fiction. It very is. It's set, far, far, far off into the future. There's obviously the invasion, the hellish invasion. What does that actually mean? What does hell mean? What has hell meant to different civilizations and people in the past? Where has that come from? What does hell mean today? How is hell being illustrated by Hugo and the team in this game? What does Mars mean? What does Mars mean in terms of isolation, being away from Earth, planet Earth, home, essentially? What does that mean, being the only human left on a barren planet? What does it mean to be, kind of scared of demons? Are you scared of demons? And, through that big giant process of looking at every single facet of Doom, we kind of stumbled onto this idea that you're the enemy of the demons in the game. So once we started looking at it from that angle, it started to make a lot more sense, and we were able to get away from that Doom hang-up in the past and kind of find something that was new and original for today. When I visited the id offices and I chatted to Hugo and Martin, one of the big things that everybody talked about was that they really didn't want heavy metal in the game. They didn't want it to feel like a heavy metal thing. And I totally understood that at that point too, because they didn't want it to feel like some sort of cliche, corny thing. They didn't want it to feel like Bill and Ted, basically. That was everybody's fear, does it feel like a Bill and Ted game? So we spent the first couple of months just experimenting with synthesizers and coming up with different synth sounds and seeing how far we could push synths. And we did things like took synths and ran them through guitar pedals and stuff like that to try and make them really aggressive and angry and play the role of a guitar, but it had a different sound, it had a different sort of vibe about it. And a lot of that stuff was heard in the original QuakeCon demo that was kind of behind closed doors, but some of that stuff ended up showing in the E3 demo as well. After that E3 demo, the reaction from fans was, it's kind of cool, but it didn't feel like Doom. And after that E3 showing, we started kind of incorporating a little bit more of guitar elements. And once we started with like 5%, it started to feel really good, and it started to feel more like a Doom game. We started adding 10% and 15%. And by the time we finished, we had a pretty guitar chunky sort of soundtrack in the end.
The music in Doom, it's pretty front and center. Like it's not like some sort of track that's playing in the background. A lot of the time, it's not so much complimenting the player as it is driving the player.
I'm a really big fan of 90s video game music. To me, some of the best music that we have in the industry came from that period. The stuff that went into, the original Killer Instinct and the original Doom and Banjo-Kazooie and Perfect Dark and these sort of great games from that period. One thing that all of those games really shared in common was that the music was really front and center. You really knew the music back to front. You could sing those melodies back to front. And I feel as we've kind of progressed through the years, a lot of things have progressed, but music's not one of those things. Music's been pushed to the background. So with this, because Doom's obviously a big franchise from the 90s, I kind of wanted to pay tribute to that regard as well, where the music should really sit up front and center. The player should be aware of the music. The music needs to play that sort of emotional payoff role. It is the reward for doing well. It is the motivator. It tells them that yes, you are okay, you are doing well, everybody's scared of you, you are you're the killer here. That's definitely something I try to do in a lot of my work, is bring the music more up front, get people to remember music again, get people to enjoy video game music again.
The soundtrack for Doom is incredibly varied and, to be honest, has quite a lot of music in it. I asked Mick, how exactly do you plan for all of the various tracks that the game required?
Right, so essentially you have the hierarchy, right? You have the overall hierarchy. At number top you have Doom. So everything that you do needs to sound like it's part of Doom. Underneath that we'd have 3 different areas that were kind of lower on the hierarchy. One of those areas was UAC, one of those areas was Hell, and one of those areas was more industrial, kind of gritty, lava-based sort of stuff, like the factory sort of thing that you hear at the starter level. So that's the beginning of a hierarchy. Underneath that, you have all the different individual scenarios that happen. So that Spider Mastermind, for example, that's very much a boss battle, so it's a bigger sort of track, but it occurs in Hell, right? So it has that sort of thing, that big part of it, but then it has a bit of element of that industrial thing as well. So we kind of start, kind of building within that hierarchy. And then once you've got that hierarchy kind of decided upon, basically they'd send me like a gameplay footage, and I'd sit there and I'd throw it up on the television. And it's kind of weird, I throw the gameplay footage up on the television and I grab a controller, and the controller's not even plugged in, it's a video, I can't play it. And I just sit there holding it, like pretending like I'm playing the game. And because that's my gaming space, I'm used to getting certain emotional reactions to video games in that space. So while I'm watching the video and certain things happen within the video, I get a feeling of like where that music should probably be taking that situation, that scenario. And I sit there with a little app on my iPhone, it's a little like a metronome app, and I just tap on that metronome, and that gives me beats per minute that feels appropriate for that battle. Then what I do is take that back into the studio, and by that point I've already got what the music needs to do and the tempo that it needs to be at. At that point, we also know where that situation is going to be occurring within the hierarchy. So once we've got all that information, we can actually sit down and start, building the track. And the reason I do it like that is because we've got a framework that you're able to actually work to. If you just kind of went in raw or whatever without any idea, it's very difficult to come up with stuff. Usually we just kind of work on that stuff and send it over, and then you don't hear it again until the game comes out. But I remember sitting here and I was working on something, I can't remember what it was. But anyway, it was a really late night and I was working up till like 4 o'clock in the morning, and Doom just got released on all the digital outlets. And while I was working away, I had a couple of like Twitch streamers up and they were playing through it. And at that point, like, you have no idea whether the music that you've done for the game is actually good or not. You really have no idea. It's all just a fly-by-seat of the pants type of thing for the whole 18 months. You just rush. And I remember watching one of these Twitch streamers, and he got up to like the 2nd level, and his head started bopping when the music came on. I was like, I think this thing might turn out okay. I think it might be all right.
During my time on the project, talking to the people behind Doom 2016, I feel like I have a much clearer understanding of the type of company id Software is. This isn't a massive studio with hundreds of employees pumping out games every year, nor is it a cocky indie startup with egos battling for attention. It is a place where people work together closely, where talent, passion, and expertise is valued, where collaboration thrives and the fingerprints of every team member can be felt in the final creation. This Doom meant a lot to a lot of people. To fans of the series, it was a phoenix from the nostalgic flames. To critics, one of the best games of the year. But to the people who work at id, Doom was much more. It was a battleground, one that they walked away from stronger, more unified, and more confident than ever. And for those of us who like to play games with id Software written on the box, that should be very exciting indeed.
Thank you so much for watching Doom Resurrected. If you'd like to support our work to tell more authentic stories about video games, then please consider becoming a patron. And we want to take a moment to thank everyone who's joined us in this journey so far in 2016. We look forward to creating many, many more video game documentaries next year. See you then.
Presence at unsafe level.